the people. The enduring ties and shared values between our people and the shared responsibility as global leaders to tackle the great issues of our time together.
स्वागत है प्रधानमंत्री जी आपका पुनः आपका लौटने के लिए। मैंने हमेशा विश्वास किया है कि संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका और भारत के मध्य यह रिश्ता 21वीं सदी के परिभाषित संबंधों में से एक है। दो गौरवशाली राष्ट्र, हम इन तथ्यों से बंधे हैं और यहाँ हमारी स्वाधीनता के प्रेम से ही हमने अपनी स्वतंत्रता प्राप्त की है। हमारे जो तथ्य हैं वो हमारे संविधान के पहले शब्द यही हैं, हम देश के नागरिक, हमारे लोगों के बीच स्थायी संबंध और साझे मूल्य और वर्तमान के महान मुद्दों से निपटने के लिए वैश्विक नेताओं के रूप में हमारी साझी जिम्मेदारी।
I'm honored to be the first to have you here in 15 years. The United States is honoring and hosting an official visit for the Republic of India. Prime Minister Modi, welcome back to the White House.
मैं सम्मानित हूं कि लगभग 15 वर्षों में पहली बार संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका भारत गणराज्य के लिए एक आधिकारिक राजकीय यात्रा की मेजबानी कर रहा है। प्रधानमंत्री मोदी जी, व्हाइट हाउस में आपका स्वागत है।
We spent a lot of time together going back to when I was vice president and you had just become prime minister. And since I've become president, we've continued a relationship built on mutual trust, candor, and respect. The challenges and opportunities facing the world in this century require that India and the United States work and lead together, and we are.
बहुत समय एक साथ बिताया है, उस समय से जब मैं उपराष्ट्रपति था और आप अभी प्रधानमंत्री बने थे, और जब से मैं राष्ट्रपति बना हूं, हमेशा इस रिश्ते को जारी रखा है हमने। और जहां हमारा इसमें आपसी विश्वास, स्पष्टवादिता और सम्मान है। इस सदी में जो चुनौतियां और अवसर विश्व के सामने हैं, यह आवश्यक है कि भारत और अमेरिका एक साथ काम करें और नेतृत्व करें, और हम कर रहे हैं।
With your partnership, we've invigorated and elevated the Quad between the United States, India, Australia, and Japan to advance our vision of a free, open, secure, and prosperous Indo-Pacific. Decades from now, people will look back and say, the Quad
खुला, सुरक्षित और समृद्ध हिंद प्रशांत की दृष्टि को आगे बढ़ाने के लिए संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका, भारत, ऑस्ट्रेलिया और जापान के मध्य क्वाड को मजबूत और उन्नत किया है। अब से दशकों बाद लोग पीछे मुड़कर देखेंगे और कहेंगे, क्वाड ने इतिहास के वृत्तचाप को वैश्विक हित की ओर मोड़ दिया, जैसा कि प्रधानमंत्री इसका वर्णन करते हैं।
Together, India and the United States are working closely on everything from ending poverty and expanding access to health care, to addressing climate change, to tackling food and energy insecurity stoked by Russia's unprovoked war in Ukraine.
साथ साथ भारत और संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका हर विषय पर मिलकर काम कर रहे हैं, जैसे कि गरीबी को समाप्त करना और स्वास्थ्य देखभाल तक पहुंच का विस्तार, जलवायु संकट को संबोधित करने से लेकर खाद्य और ऊर्जा असुरक्षा से निपटना, जो यूक्रेन पर रूस के कारण युद्ध से प्रभावित हुआ।
We've made critical and emerging technologies the pillar of our next generation partnership to ensure that these technologies promote and protect our values, remain open, accessible, and trusted and secure.
हमने महत्वपूर्ण और उभरती प्रौद्योगिकी अपनी साझेदारी का एक स्तंभ बनाया है, यह सुनिश्चित करने के लिए कि इन प्रौद्योगिकियों हमारे द्वारा हमारे मूल्यों को बढ़ावा और सुरक्षा मिलेगी और यह खुले, सुलभ, विश्वसनीय और सुरक्षित रहेंगी।
All this matters for America, for India, and for the world. We face an inflection point, one of those moments that only come around every several generations, when so much is changing technologically, politically, socially, and environmentally, that the decisions we make today are going to determine our future for decades to come.
ये सब बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है अमेरिका के लिए, भारत के लिए और सारे विश्व के लिए। हम एक मोड़ का सामना कर रहे हैं, ऐसे क्षण जो हर कई पीढ़ियों में केवल एक बार आते हैं, जहां बहुत कुछ परिवर्तित हो रहा है, तकनीकी रूप से, राजनीतिक रूप से, सामाजिक रूप से और पर्यावरण की दृष्टि से, कि आज हम जो निर्णय लेंगे वह आने वाले दशकों के लिए भविष्य का निर्धारण करेंगे।
And as democracies, we can better tap into the full talent of all of our people and attract investments as true and trusted partners as leading nations, with our greatest export being the power of our example. Equity under the law, freedom of expression, religious pluralism, and diversity of our people. These core
लोकतंत्र के स्वरूप में हमने सभी लोगों की पूर्ण प्रतिभा का बेहतर तरीके से लाभ उठाया है और हम उठा सकते हैं, और अग्रणी देशों के रूप में सच्चे और विश्वसनीय भागीदारों के रूप में निवेश को आकर्षित कर सकते हैं। हमारा सबसे बड़ा निर्यात हमारे उदाहरण की शक्ति है। कानून के तहत समानता, अभिव्यक्ति की स्वतंत्रता, धार्मिक बहुलवाद, हमारे लोगों की विविधता, ये मूल सिद्धांत दृढ़ हैं और विकसित हुए हैं, यहाँ तक कि जब उन्हें चुनौतियों का सामना करना पड़ा है हमारे प्रत्येक देश के इतिहास में, और दूर भविष्य तक हमारी ताकत को ये ऊर्जा प्रदान करेंगे।
And they form a special bond among our nations, forged by the special bond among our people, based on values that are universal, a duty to family and elders, treating all people with respect and dignity, a premium on education and creativity, self-discipline, hard work, entrepreneurship, faith and service to community, courage and resilience, and tolerance and opportunity for all.
और ये हमारे राष्ट्रों के बीच एक विशेष बंधन बनाते हैं, हमारे लोगों के बीच विशेष बंधन द्वारा निर्मित उन मूल्यों पर आधारित जो सार्वभौमिक हैं, परिवार और बड़ों के प्रति कर्तव्य, सभी लोगों के साथ सम्मान और गरिमा के साथ व्यवहार, शिक्षा और रचनात्मक पर बढ़ोतरी, आत्म अनुशासन, कड़ी मेहनत और उद्यमशीलता, विश्वास और समुदाय के लिए सेवा, साहस और लचीलापन, सहिष्णुता और अवसर।
I've seen this dynamism in my visits to India. I see it in Indian American diaspora. It reflects every part of American life. It remains a bridge between our nations and only grows stronger with each generation. We see it with record numbers of Indian Americans serving in the United States Congress. We see it here at the White House, where proud Americans with Indian heritage serve our country every day, including our Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris.
में यह गतिशीलता देखी है। मैं इसे भारतीय अमेरिकी प्रवासियों में देखता हूँ, जो अमेरिकी जीवन के हर भाग को दर्शाता है, और हमारे राष्ट्रों के बीच एक पुल बना हुआ है जो प्रत्येक पीढ़ी के साथ निरंतर मजबूत होता है। हम इसे संयुक्त राज्य कांग्रेस में बड़ी संख्या में देखते हैं, और हम इसे यहाँ व्हाइट हाउस में देखते हैं, जहाँ भारतीय विरासत के साथ गर्वित अमेरिकी हर दिन हमारे देश की सेवा कर रहे हैं, और जिनमें उपराष्ट्रपति कमला हैरिस भी शामिल हैं।
The granddaughter, the proud granddaughter of Indian civil servant, daughter of an Indian student, turned American scientist, who came to the United States when she's only 19 years old to pursue her dream of curing cancer. A family like so many of ours in our nation, that speaks of the thousand stories of determination, courage, and hope.
एक भारतीय समाज सेवक की पोती, एक भारतीय छात्र जो अमेरिकी वैज्ञानिक बनी, जो 19 साल की उम्र में संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका आई थी कैंसर के इलाज के अपने सपने को साकार करने के लिए, उनकी बेटी। हमारे देशों में बहुत सारे परिवारों में से एक जो हजारों दृढ़ संकल्प, साहस और आशा की कहानियां कहते हैं।
Stories that define the relationship and the limitless possibilities between the United States and India, two great nations, two great friends, two great powers that can define the course of the 21st century. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for your partnership, and I'll turn it over to you.
परिभाषित करने वाली कहानियां और संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका और भारत के मध्य असीम संभावनाएं, दो महान राष्ट्र, दो अच्छे मित्र, दो महान शक्तियां, यह 21वीं सदी के पाठ्यक्रम को परिभाषित करेगा। माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी, आपकी साझेदारी के लिए धन्यवाद। अब मैं आपको सौंपता हूं।
Distinguished guests, the Prime Minister of the Republic of India.
राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन, फर्स्ट लेडी डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन, डिस्टिंग्विश्ड गेस्ट, उमंग और उत्साह से भरे हुए इंडियन अमेरिकन मेरे प्यारे साथियों, आप सबको नमस्कार। सबसे पहले तो मैं राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन के मित्रतापूर्ण स्वागत और दीर्घ दृष्टिपूर्ण संबोधन के लिए उनका हृदय से बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। थैंक यू प्रेसिडेंट बाइडेन फॉर योर फ्रेंडशिप।
President Biden, First Lady Dr. Jill Biden, distinguished guests, friends from the Indian American community filled with energy and excitement, a very good morning to all of you. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to President Biden for his warm welcome and his far-sighted speech. Thank you, President Biden, for your friendship.
फ्रेंड्स, आज व्हाइट हाउस में शानदार स्वागत समारोह के एक प्रकार से ये भारत के 140 करोड़ देशवासियों का सम्मान है, 140 करोड़ देशवासियों का गौरव है। ये सम्मान अमेरिका में रहने वाले 4 मिलियन से अधिक भारतीय मूल के लोगों का भी सम्मान है। इस सम्मान के लिए मैं राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन और डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन का उनके प्रति हृदय से बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूं।
Friends, this grand welcome ceremony at the White House today is an honor and pride for 1.4 billion people of India. This is also an honor for more than 4 million people of Indian origin living in the US. For this honor, I express my heartfelt gratitude to President Biden and Dr. Jill Biden.
फ्रेंड्स, करीब 3 दशक पहले एक साधारण नागरिक के रूप में मैं अमेरिका यात्रा पर आया था और उस समय मैंने व्हाइट हाउस को बाहर से देखा था। प्रधानमंत्री बनने के बाद तो मैं स्वयं तो कई बार यहां पर आया हूं, लेकिन इतनी बड़ी संख्या में इंडियन अमेरिकन समुदाय के लिए व्हाइट हाउस के द्वार आज पहली बार खोले गए हैं।
Friends, about 3 decades ago, I came on a visit to America as a common man. At that time, I had seen the White House from outside. After becoming the Prime Minister, I have come here many times, but today, for the first time, the doors of the White House have been opened for the Indian American community in such large numbers.
भारतीय समुदाय के लोग अपने टैलेंट, कर्मठता और निष्ठा से अमेरिका में भारत की शान बढ़ा रहे हैं। आप सब हमारे संबंधों की असली ताकत है। आज आपको दिए गए सम्मान के लिए मैं राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन और डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन का हृदय से अभिनंदन करता हूं। उनका जितना धन्यवाद करो उतना कम है।
The people of the Indian community are enhancing India's glory in the US through their talent, hard work, and dedication. You are the real strength of our relationship. I thank President Biden and Dr. Jill Biden for the honor you've been given today. I think I can't thank him enough for this.
फ्रेंड्स, भारत और अमेरिका दोनों के समाज और व्यवस्थाएं लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों पर आधारित है। दोनों देशों के संविधान, उसके पहले 3 शब्द और जैसा राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन ने अभी जिसका उल्लेख किया, वी द पीपल, हम दोनों देश अपनी विविधता पर गर्व करते हैं। हम सर्वजन हिताय सर्वजन सुखाय इस मूलभूत सिद्धांत में विश्वास रखते हैं।
The societies and institutions of both India and the US are based on democratic values. The constitutions of both countries begin with the following 3 words: we, the people, as President Biden just mentioned. Both of our countries take pride in their diversity. Both of us believe in the fundamental principle of in the interest of all, for the welfare of all.
पोस्ट कोविड काल में वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर एक नया रूप ले रहा है। इस कालखंड में भारत और अमेरिका की मित्रता पूरे विश्व के सामर्थ्य को बढ़ाने में पूरक होगी। ग्लोबल गुड के लिए, वैश्विक शांति, स्थिरता और समृद्धि के लिए दोनों देश साथ मिलकर काम करने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध है। हमारी मजबूत स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप डेमोक्रेसी की ताकत का स्पष्ट प्रमाण है।
In the post-COVID era, the world order is taking a new shape. In this time period, the friendship between India and the US will be instrumental in enhancing the strength of the whole world. The two countries are committed to work together for the global good and for global peace, stability, and prosperity. Our strong strategic partnership is a clear proof of the power of democracy.
फ्रेंड्स, अब से कुछ ही देर में राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन और मैं भारत अमेरिका संबंधों और अन्य क्षेत्रीय और वैश्विक मुद्दों पर विस्तार से बातचीत करेंगे। मुझे विश्वास है कि हमेशा की तरह आज भी हमारी बातचीत बहुत सकारात्मक और उपयोगी रहेगी। आज दोपहर को मुझे यूएस कांग्रेस को एक बार फिर से संबोधित करने का अवसर मिलेगा। इस सम्मान के लिए मैं आपका हृदय से आभारी हूं।
Friends, in a short while from now, President Biden and I will discuss India-US relations and various regional and global issues. I'm sure that, as always, our conversation today will be very positive and useful. This afternoon, I will also have an opportunity to address the US Congress for a second time. I am deeply grateful for this honor.
मैं यही कामना करता हूं और 140 करोड़ भारतवासी भी यही कामना करते हैं कि भारत का तिरंगा और अमेरिका का स्टार एंड स्ट्राइप्स हमेशा नई ऊंचाइयां छूते रहे। राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन एक बार फिर आपके स्नेह भरे निमंत्रण के लिए, आपके गर्मजोशी भरे स्वागत और आतिथ्य सत्कार के लिए मैं आपका और 140 करोड़ हिंदुस्तान वासियों की तरफ से आभार प्रकट करता हूं। जय हिंद। गॉड ब्लेस अमेरिका। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
I wish for, and the 1.4 billion people of India wish with me for India's tricolor and America's stars and stripes to always keep flying higher and higher. President Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, once again, I thank you for your kind invitation, for your warm welcome and hospitality, also on behalf of 1.4 billion people of India. Jai Hind, God bless America. Thank you very much.
President Biden making those opening remarks, and thank you. We have some of our guests from our last hour also still with us, and we have new guests joining us as well in moments from now. I want to welcome to the program Ambassador Arun Singh. I want to welcome to the program David Frum, senior writer at The Atlantic. We still have Professor Caryl, General Shukla, and Dr. Elliot MacArthur with us, and in a moment from now we'll be adding other guests as well. Christian Caryl at the Washington Post, Joe Walsh, former American presidential candidate, will be with us in a moment from now. Elliot, जाने से पहले आप कुछ कहना चाह रहे थे about the Indian American community? Go ahead.
I did, and thank you for bringing me back briefly. I was a Dale Earnhardt fan. I'll just drive fast to the airport. Anyway, my comment would be that I think Modi and Biden both hit on it in their speeches, is that it's important to remember the role of the Indian community in America. They're an important group in domestic elections, and they're much more divided in their support of Modi. The diaspora community, if anyone, I think, will have an important role to play in discussions that are related to rights of minorities, and perhaps even the message that one of the greatest strengths of a democracy and a democratic nation is its diversity. So thank you very much. Aapka bahut dhanyavad.
Have a safe flight. Thank you for being with us. Welcome, everybody, to the program. If you've just joined us, the Prime Minister has been welcomed ceremonially at the White House. The two anthems have played out in their opening remarks. Both leaders have spoken about democracy, we the people, the opening words of both of our constitutions, shared values, and of course, both have referenced the Indian American community, Biden making a reference specifically to Kamala Harris and her Indian ancestry. Like I said, we were having a very animated debate actually about whether a multipolar, multilateral world is even possible. We had Professor Giri saying, pick a side, pick the Americans. Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed getting very agitated about that. But let's get the big picture. General Shukla is still with us. General Shukla, let me give you the first word because you were waiting a long time. You were with us from before, and then I'll get the others in. General Shukla, go ahead.
So I'll pick up from where the debate was left off. And we were talking about multipolarity, actually.
Yeah.
I think what the External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, was emphasizing was multilateralism, where he was saying you maximize leverages from all relationships. But once again, I was saying that let's be commonsensical in our foreign policy. Descend from these lofty Brahminical platforms and get into Punjabi-ish, which is common sense. It is more, it delivers better. And in that sense, you just see what is multilateralism. If you get cheap Russian oil and ice it into a technology relationship, where is the problem? Also look at this issue of values. I mean, values are of course important. We have our perspective on values. America has its own perspective in values. We all have our problems with values. There's no point in raising them in this platform. But look at the larger issue. We are up against China, which has an entirely different value system. So I think as President Biden and the Prime Minister just said, if the two democracies get together, aggregate that power not to jackboot around the world, but to radiate deterrence in a very sophisticated sense, why is that power not good? Remember, if you have power, your values rule, else you submit. So even for the values debate, you need power. And this is, Ambassador Ahmed made that point. And very respectfully, so senior. What I just wish to say is we have to start looking at a new strategic outlook. In a military which is structured in character and profile to protect a $3 trillion economy, is very different from military we need to protect a $35 trillion economy. In that sense, the G engine deal, Indus, the whole ISET, and ISET has not yet delivered. It's just very prospective. These are very essential to India's national security makeover. Why should we, coy about this? And the last point I'd like to make it, look at the strategic opportunity. Just when America has realized what China is doing today, in 44 key technologies, who rules? 37 China rules, not America. 37. In Taiwan, in many military contingencies, the Americans are worried that if the Chinese rocket force opens up, 90% of their aircraft will be taken on ground. So the consequence of, the innovation and all this stuff, at the end of the operational pipeline, these are the things that are happening. And therefore, India and US need to get together. We do not need to abandon our strategic autonomy to do that, nor do we need to get into an alliance. And look at what are you talking? This is India, which is a heavyweight, 142 crore, fifth largest economy, second largest military. Who can shove us this way or that? We will walk along with the Americans when we need, and we may or may not cross over if the situation doesn't arise. So all that it is doing is that this is strengthening deterrence. What is wrong with strengthening deterrence? One last point I make. You see, in the other domains, look at millet, look at green hydrogen, look at DPI. India is so ambitious. We want to be number one, this, that. In the national security space, when will we ever get ambitious? And so these two deals, Indus and ISET, are great game changers in that sense. Also, one last point I'd like to make, it is just not we who need the Americans need us. Just let me give you a piece of statistics, and I think this is John Thornton. This is the reality of the world order today. I'm told that in the sanctions against Russia, out of 170 countries in Africa, Latin America, Asia, the Indo-Pacific, West Asia, only 5 have joined the sanctions. Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore. Now, that's the reality of the world. So we are up, I would say, against a serious challenge, China, and we need to realize that the challenge is here and now. So we need to deliver faster. We need to be far more fleet-footed, and that is what this visit is going to do.
Okay, I'm going to say thank you at this point, General Shukla, and go on as we look at and analyze and pick up from where you've left off, Ambassador Arun Singh. Let me bring you in right away. The big question. How far does this relationship go beyond the rhetoric, beyond the ceremonial sort of welcome? What is it all about? Interesting to see both leaders reference democracy. There's been a lot of sort of op-eds out in the Western press. We have Caryl here of the Washington Post, the New York Times. Both have pieces on pushing sort of Biden to raise issues of democracy with the Modi administration, with the Modi government. And we know that India will not react well to that. It is unlikely that any public commentary certainly will be made. You have some lawmakers actually boycotting the US Congress sort of address. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is for only the third world leader to be hosted as a state sort of guest, addressing the US Congress for the second time. The White House doors open for an extremely successful Indian American community. I think we should underline that as well. What's your big takeaway from what you've seen thus far, Ambassador Arun Singh?
Thanks, Barkha. So 2 aspects. One, clearly the relationship is poised to be launched to another level in terms of economic, technological, and security partnership. This has been enabled by the earlier effort and earlier opportunities that had been done by the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement in 2008, which had allowed access to higher levels of technology in the US. You would recall that till 2008, we hardly bought any defense supplies from the US. Now we have contracted to buy more than $20 billion worth of defense supplies from the US, and an additional $3 billion are in the works for drones. We are talking of defense technology partnerships. So all that was enabled by that particular agreement. I think the next big step that was taken was what President Biden and Prime Minister Modi did in May 2022, when in their joint statement in Tokyo on the margins of the Quad Summit, there were 2 paragraphs referring to a partnership in critical and emerging technologies. And after that, the 2 national security advisors met in January in Washington and then 13, 14 June in New Delhi, to launch this major initiative for a partnership in critical and emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, quantum, cyber, 6G, commercialization of space, semiconductors, and defense. That is really taking the relationship to another level. And ISET has become the new organizing framework for the partnership. You're talking about GE now announcing that it will transfer technology and do production in India of jet engines, something that they had not agreed to when the matter was raised in 2014. And it is ISET that has now enabled the US system to allow it to go through. In fact, in the White House statement that was put out after the January meeting, it was specifically mentioned that they will work to expedite the processing of ISET. So I think what we should look out for, now you're seeing the announcement on semiconductors. You're seeing the announcement related to cooperation in space. So what has happened is that the framework of ISET is a signal from the top levels of the government, from the national security advisors, the national security establishments, to other parts of the government, to business, to academia, that from the national security perspective, we encourage this cooperation. And at a time when the US is blocking this cooperation, for example, with China, it's a very important signal. So that's one aspect. Second, you referred to the concerns and questions being raised about democracy and whether the US will raise it, not raise it. Look, all societies have challenges. And if you look at the US itself, institutionalized racism in the US, voter suppression in the US, redistricting of districts to favor certain parties, what happened on Capitol Hill in January 6th in 2021 to prevent a peaceful transfer of power. So, each country can, point a finger at the other in terms of challenges they may have. And I think that's why I think, as I understand it, the US approach is that have a dialogue as among friends and, talk in general terms about all societies needing to work to strengthen democratic functioning, strengthen human rights observance everywhere. And, you can't take a hectoring approach to any other country. And that's a far more productive way to address any challenges related to this.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, because I think the India of today will say, don't lecture us, talk to us as equals. I just want to welcome Joe Walsh, who's, of course, a former presidential candidate, a big Trump critic, lapsed Republican, if I may call him that, at least the Republican Party under Trump. Joe, welcome to the program. I'll come to you in just a moment. I want to bring in David Frum. David, there's a disconnect between what's happening at the White House and what the media is writing about. Literally every single sort of editorial is talking about the democracy question. Laud India, but push Modi on democracy. You've had Obama in an interview to Christian Amanpour also talk about religious minorities in India. And you have the White House. It's like there's a dissonance. There's a dissonance between the media pushing for a certain kind of conversation and the Biden administration. And how do you see sort of this dissonance? Is the China factor, is the size of the Indian market, is the success of the Indian American community basically going to be the all prevailing narrative out of the White House? What do you see? David Frum. Give us a second. We need to unmute you. Can we unmute David Frum, please? Oh, David, you're muted at your end. Can you? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
In public, I think the tone will be entirely congratulatory and positive. In private, there will be discussion of important disagreements that have arisen between India and the United States. And I would say the relationship right now does have strains, and the whole purpose of a visit like this is to deal with the strains. And let me revert to some. I think American concerns are not just about internal democracy in India, but about India using Indian law to try to police the international internet, to talk about what may or may not be discussed. And the question is, will India follow the example of China and become a place where they have a separate national sub-internet that is sealed off from the world at the control of the Indian government? I think there are going to be important environmental discussions. India is now the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gases after the United States and China. But India is rising more rapidly than anybody in its greenhouse emissions. The uses of coal in India is going to be a problem. There are security, in the realm of security. I think India's stance on the Ukraine war has shaken a lot of American hopes for the future direction of Indian policy. It can't be that the relationship is going to be one where the United States supports India's security needs against China, but India keeps entirely its own counsel and doesn't cooperate with anybody else when other people have security needs. So I think those are going to be some of the major points of friction, but they will be behind the closed doors, not in public.
Before I open this up, I just want to bring in Ambassador Arun Singh to take that on, that this isn't just about like sort of wading into the democratic debate within India or the debate, the political debate within India. This is also about the global internet. This is also about saying, hey, if you want us to stand up with you when China comes and squats on your territory, you've got to do the same for us. Now, we are a country that went from hosting the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Foreign Minister Summit straight to the court. And we have called that our right, our strategic autonomy. How do you respond to what David just said, Arun?
So Barkha, I just said that, and I have been commenting and writing on this with some regularity, that the India-US relationship is inevitably going to consolidate. There is a lot of strategic convergence. There's a lot of economic, technological opportunity. Many of the US companies are getting cutting-edge design and technology work done in India. So there's a lot of, human capital that is really working for joint purpose. Now, having said that, we have to allow space to each other for difference of opinion on some issues. Our geographical location is different, historical experience is different. We should not expect that we will agree on everything. Now, if looking at it from the Indian perspective, does the United States always do with Pakistan what India wants? Why did the United States just a few weeks ago authorize a $450 million sustainment package for the F-16s with Pakistan, which Pakistan only uses against India? And they are doing it because they want access to the Pakistani leadership. They want Pakistan to allow their drones to overfly Pakistan, to go to Afghanistan for counterterrorism purposes. So US has certain compulsions based on which it acts. And it is contrary to India's interests. And India has to understand that in the context of the overall relationship, there are certain things that you have to accept where you're not in agreement. For the very same reason, the United States has to accept that there will be issues on which India will have a different point of view. More than in today's context, if you look at closest allies and partners of the United States and long-standing allies and partners of the US, they have not gone along with the US. Israel, a very strong partner of the US, has not gone along with the United States on Russia because Israel needs Russia in the context of what it wants to do in Syria. Turkey, a NATO ally, has not gone along with the US on Russia-Ukraine. Hungary has not allowed membership so far of Sweden in NATO and has not gone along with the US on Russia-Ukraine. So the US has to understand, or what Saudi Arabia is doing with China. So US has to understand that in today's global context is different from the bipolar context, is different from the unipolar context, with huge contestation playing out today, that closest partners and allies of the US will not always agree with the US policy choice. And sometimes the US policy choice inevitably has proven later to be wrong. For example, in Iraq, US intervened and India opposed that. And then subsequently, India was proved right. So US should not accept that anything that the US system decides is the perfect answer and everybody must fall in line. So
yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad you raised Iraq because we do now know that the Americans and it was under Bush, and I'm sure David will have something to say about that later, were keen that the Indian military support that war. And Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was Prime Minister then, said no, and it turned out to be the absolutely correct decision. So thank you, Ambassador Arun Singh, for flagging that. Let me bring in Joe Walsh now at this point. Joe, you find yourself in a very interesting position. You're a Trump critic. You don't like the direction of where the Republicans are going, but you've seen the American left basically it's been a little predictable. Bernie Sanders, AOC, among those who have today said, no, look, we're not, we're going to criticize the Prime Minister of India while he's visiting us. We don't agree with his policies, and it's standing on the center right. How do you see what's happening, Joe Walsh?
Good to be with you. Look, I agree with much of what the ambassador said. I agree with much of what my friend David Frum said, in that there's a very different conversation publicly and privately. Look, here's the deal. India is our friend. India is our ally. The leader of India, Modi, has systematically attacked democracy in his country now in a very methodic fashion over the last number of years. President Biden and America, privately, at least right now, need to make that clear that that's a real concern of ours. I think that's really important for Biden to convey. The world's a complicated place. Oftentimes your friends and allies, right, are people in countries who may not have the same concept of freedom and democracy that we have. I get that. But what Modi has done in India, when it comes to democracy, is a real concern and should be a real concern. And I hope Biden conveys that.
Let me push back just a little bit and say, whatever be anybody's views on Narendra Modi, Indians would turn around and say a couple of things, and I imagine this is what they will say. Not that I speak for anybody, I'm just guessing. They would say, listen, our transfer of power from one election to the other is actually much smoother than you guys. Look what you guys did at the Capitol Hill. Look at the January 6th insurrection. Your guys lost an election and wouldn't accept it. Our guys go home and say, congratulations, well done to the opponents. Modi regularly loses state elections, right? When he wins fair and square. I'm just giving you a counter view here. And finally, the Indians would say, why should we be lectured by you? You are no longer the global sort of arbiter of democracy in the world. You've got to get off your high horse. What will you say to that?
Well, we should never be on our high horse. And I agree with you that, and David Frum would agree with you as well. We've got real concerns about the state of our democracy in this country. But we're talking about January 6th. We're talking about Donald Trump, a former president who did refuse to accept the will of the people. But and America stood up to that. And that's very different than the ruling government right now in India systematically attacking the legal structure, attacking the press, attacking a lot of the institutions in India, so as to limit and marginalize democracy in that country. So look, we should live in a world where Modi and Biden can have a very frank talk in private. And Modi should be able to, feel very free to give his concerns about the state of democracy in America. But we are still the great arbiter of democracy in this country. And I just hope Biden conveys his concerns to Modi.
Okay, so very interesting. Over the last, I think, 2 hours, we've had such different perspectives depending on who you speak to. General Shukla, welcome back to our broadcast. Christian, let me get you in. I have a feeling, and I could be wrong, that what's going to overshadow the conversation at the White House is not the democracy debate that papers like the Post or the Times have been writing about, but it's going to be China, and just the size of the Indian market, transfer of sort of technology, selling armed drones, getting the Indians to somehow be less dependent on Russia for defense procurement. Do you believe that there are two kind of different parallel universes that looking at this visit, the media, the liberal media, and actually the Biden administration, and there's no convergence between these two conversations?
Well, I think the media have actually done a pretty good job, actually, of covering the contradictions, or one might even say the hypocrisy underlying American policy towards India. I've seen a lot of exploration of criticisms of Modi's policies domestically in India, and I've seen a lot of, I think, fairly nuanced coverage of how the United States, how the Biden administration is trying to finesse the concerns it may have about those issues while simultaneously building up a very constructive relationship with India. I think the coverage has actually been fairly nuanced and aware of the subtleties of this situation. coverage of the letter of the congressional letter that you mentioned earlier, which was somewhat critical of Modi's record at home toward his opponents in particular, I think has kind of reflected that. I haven't really seen any media coverage just say, "Oh, Modi's terrible. We shouldn't be talking to him at all." I think there's quite an awareness that if you want to counter China, you need to figure out some sort of way of maintaining good relations with India, and you may not always be in a position to lecture India about things that are happening there. So I think it's actually I'm actually rather intrigued by the way that a lot of the American media have been covering this visit. The coverage is very complex. I think befitting the complexity of the situation.
Let me take that to David from, and then I'll come to you, General Shukla. David, what's at the heart of this relationship? What is at the heart of it? On this trip, what are both leaders going to be looking at that's at the centerpiece of it?
Yes. I think what is at the heart of it is the question of how do we even talk about what this relationship is? It's not an alliance. It's not a partnership. It's not even there are certainly a lot of friendly people-to-people connections, but relationships between the Indian state and the American state are not especially close. There isn't a lot of information sharing, and there aren't a lot of agreements. But there is a list of shared common perception of threat, and the United States has been building on that shared perception since really the Clinton years, when President Clinton began the reorientation of U.S. policy closer toward India. It was developed very emphatically under George W. Bush, a lot of technology sharing. President Obama continued it. It's now, however, become a little bit more complicated because while it's very clear to Americans what India thinks the United States can do for India, it's been harder and harder to say, well, okay, we got your list, fine. What about our list? And it's not a question here of being lectured. It's a question of being presented with a list of demands or wishes and very little reciprocation when reciprocation is needed. And we see that on Ukraine now. We've seen that on other issues in the past. It's got to be a relationship of give and take. But from an American point of view, it's mostly a relationship of take.
I want to give that to Ambassador Arun Singh and then to General Shukla because Arun, you've lived and served as India's ambassador in Washington. Did you get that kind of cynicism that like David is bringing up now? One of the things, for example, that is often like I was looking at a research paper from Stimson Center that actually shows that if you look at the Quad, Japan and Australia are much closer aligned to voting on the side of the United States at the UNGA than India, that has voted with the Americans only 20% of the times. Now, Indians are going to turn around and say, hey, that's us. We choose our positions based on an issue. David is saying, okay, so what's in it for us? What's your answer? Hang on, sir. We can't hear you. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I disagree with what David's assessment is. It is a very, very strong partnership. And I think US is also recognizing that in today's multipolar context, alliances are not necessarily the way to go and to go with strong partnerships. And I'll give you some examples. We have signed a whole host of agreements. 2016, we did the logistics support agreement with the United States for the militaries. And there's a lot of cooperation based on that. 2018, we did the communication compatibility and security agreement. And after that, the communications between the militaries have really picked up. 2020, we did an agreement of sharing on geospatial information. And that has been very useful to both the militaries, particularly in the maritime domain. US now does more military exercises with India than with any country outside NATO. India does more military exercises with the US than with any country, and these exercises are building in complexity and building towards interoperability. So there is a lot going on. And now in terms of take, when I was in the US, I visited Silicon Valley very often. And I could see that Indian origin tech entrepreneurs, Indian origin tech workers, Indian origin CEOs were an integral part of US global leadership in innovation. Even today, leading US companies, jet engines, semiconductors, are getting cutting-edge R&D and development work done in India. It's not Indian IP, it is US IP, but the work is happening in India. They're employing 5,000, 8,000, 10,000 people. So the Indian human capital is very important for US to continue to have its global leadership in innovation in the global context. And that's why today, when China is posing a major challenge to the US, aside from the security challenge, an economic challenge, a technological challenge, and in many of the critical edge technology areas, China is actually ahead of the US. And US recognizes that partnership with India, with the Indian human capital, is critical for the US to maintain that lead. So there is a lot of take in this for the US. It just doesn't play out the same way in the public domain.
Caryl Shukla, you've been making a big case about the strategic cooperation. There's some sort of American skepticism that India can't have it all our way. What would you say to that? This is, of course, the meeting on at the Oval as we speak, the formal bilateral meeting between our two leaders. Go ahead, Caryl Shukla.
So see, I'll just make a couple of points. You read Tanvi Madan's The Fateful Triangle, how China shaped Indo-US relations. China has always been a factor, right from the Cold War. I can give you a number of instances. So to say that China has suddenly become a factor in the Indo-US relationship is escaping from reality. Two, alliances. As I think Ambassador Arun Singh said, let me give you two more examples. What is the response of two treaty allies, Japan and Korea, in a Taiwan contingency? There's a lot of strategic commentary doing the rounds that Japan has said that in an amphibious assault against Taiwan, we will not step in. Korea has said we have North Korea to take off. So even alliances are no guarantee. What these four things will do is that they will strengthen these two powers for deterrence, which in my view is good enough. Even the Chinese are not foolish. Once they read these deterrence signals, they will. Now the question is what Ashley raises when you spoke about debates. And I think he raises a very valid point. He says the American fear is that, or the American wishes, that this deterrence should translate into operational collaboration. So that if deterrence fails, we should be able to defeat China. Now that is something that the Americans cannot impose on us. Just like I say that do we want American blood and treasure when it comes to a Sino-Indian conflict? No. Why should we expect blood and treasure from them? We are the second largest military. But if we can get technology, and now see what are the difference in technology? I just make this one point. Russian military, 42% platforms, very good. Take it to 50. Take from the Americans what the Russians cannot give you. The Russian military doesn't have a Silicon Valley. It doesn't have an innovation system which empowers the military. That was one of the reasons why the Soviet Union collapsed. So what the Americans are going to give us in the strategic military enterprise is this innovation system. So we are taking from each what we need, and we will reciprocate in good measure to the extent that we can. And just one last point, I like to reiterate this, that even as we debate, should we not, please remember that the Chinese military juggernaut is growing in strength. So all I say is, and look at how these debates started. Just give me 1 minute, because it's very important to understand. When the Cold War ended, that was the precise moment when the Chinese stepped up game in terms of defense investments, transformation. Look what happens in the Indian context. Kick lighter proposals. We just begin to explore defense cooperation. NSS, we dialogue the BMD. Civil nuclear deal, of course, it legitimizes the nuclear program. It pushes up to sharpen the embrace against rising China. The DTTI was killed by bureaucracies. So the nature of democracies is that they are slow. We must now realize that here is a customer which is a tough customer, wily customer. So just the last point, why can't the world's oldest and largest democracy gather their strategic wit to deliver better than China?
Let's bring in Christian and Joe and then come back to David. Christian, you did want to make a point. I'll add a question of my own. You had American Secretary of State in Beijing on the weekend. So before Biden decided to call Xi Jinping a dictator, it looked like the Americans were trying to thaw their relationship with the Chinese. From an Indian perch, the Americans do what they need to, changing their positions frequently as it suits their national interest. Why would you expect India to do anything different? When I say you, I don't mean you, Christian. I mean the American establishment. Christian, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm not sure I see the contradiction. Of course, the United States should be talking with China, not least to minimize the possibility of military conflict. I would assume Americans speaking with China is also in India's interest, because India doesn't have much interest in seeing the Chinese and American navies go at each other in the Indo-Pacific space. So I don't really see any contradiction there. I just wanted to come back to David's point that, there is a lot of frustration in Washington about some of the things India is doing. For example, I urge your listeners to look at this really amazing piece that the New York Times just published about how India has been profiting from the sanctions on Russia. It's a really remarkable article, and it details just how much oil India has been buying from the Russians and how that has actually affected world oil prices. So, and the fact of the matter is that is an irritant in the India-U.S. relationship, and that's something that Washington isn't really enjoying seeing. So, I mean, this is the sort of thing that will complicate the relationship, even as we try to build a more constructive relationship. Sure, America gets some things from its relationship with India, but that particular point is exactly, and of course, coupled with the larger refusal of India to censure Putin in any way, that's the kind of thing that will keep the relationship very, very complicated. That's just a fact of life.
Okay, let me bring in Joe, and I can see Ambassador Arun Singh probably itching to react to some of that. But Joe, the Indians would say, and I've actually seen this happening once. It's very interesting that Barack Obama made a big point about democracy in an interview with Christian Amanpour. But I remember when Barack Obama was president, he came on to India. He had a great set of meetings with Prime Minister Modi. And then just before he was leaving, he did this public event where he drove home the point about India's constitution guaranteeing religious pluralism. Except that he then took the flight from Delhi to Saudi Arabia, which is neither a democracy nor pluralistic. And Indians, even critics of the Modi government, turned around and said, really? And I think that's what a lot of people in America don't get, that there is a different India today that isn't going to, irrespective of how much we may criticize our politicians at home, is probably going to close ranks when they see duplicity. And I think there's a dissonance there. But do go ahead, jump in, and then I'll get Arun Singh to comment on the Russia, Ukraine, and the oil sort of debate. Go ahead, Joe.
And I'll just go back to the beginning, this issue of an alliance or a partnership. I think we are strong partners with India. And that's why, again, it's especially disappointing to see one of our partners go down this authoritarian road much further than we are comfortable with. The other point I'd make is Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a big deal. And it was really important for countries around the world to publicly stand with whatever side they're with. And it's been disappointing that Israel hasn't publicly chosen to help this worldwide coalition against Russia. And it's been disappointing, and it will be a huge disappointment to America that India has not been more forceful and has not stood with the worldwide coalition against Putin. Not just reflective of what that means to America, what that means to the rest of the world. I think that's a much bigger issue at play here.
Okay, Ambassador Arun Singh, we've got about 10 minutes. I want you to pick up the oil debate, right? We've heard Foreign Minister Jaishankar saying, okay, if you don't want us to buy Russian oil, lift the sanctions, get the Iranian oil into the market, get Venezuelan oil into the market. Why would we not buy oil that is cheaper for our people? But Christian's point on it was very interesting, that this is a real point of disagreement. Ambassador Arun Singh.
So I think it's a more complicated picture than what Christian indicated, because even today, Europe buys more oil and gas from Russia than India is doing, despite cutting down. The second, when Europe cut down its purchases from Russia, they started picking up oil from the Gulf, which was India's traditional source. Now, when that source was not available to India, India couldn't just say that, we give up on our energy needs and we will not care about the energy needs of the people of India. So then India had to look for the alternative. And many Western analysts themselves have now pointed out that being able to access the Russian oil and it coming to the market brought some measure of stability to global oil prices. Otherwise, the level of inflation, including in US and Europe, would have gone up. Recession in Europe would have taken even a bigger strength. And then whatever India has been getting from Russia has been at prices below the cap that US and Europe have set. So even though that's not a UN related cap, even though it's US and Europe cap, India has observed that. And then India has based, as you would have seen, processing some of that oil, supplied products to Europe, meeting European requirements at prices that the Europeans have found very useful. And then under European regulation, when you do substantial processing, then it is not considered Russian oil. So there is a very complicated picture. It's very simplistic to say that India is benefiting from Russian oil. India has to maintain the energy needs of its people and is meeting the norms and standards that the US and Europe themselves have set about how to handle this particular oil. Now, in this question of censuring Putin, for various reasons, 60% of our defense inventory is still of Russian origin. So you don't want to be in a situation and US would not India to be in a situation where it is not able to stand up to China's unilateral and assertive behavior on the India-China border. But beyond that, India has now said repeatedly that it supports sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries. That is an indirect criticism of what Russia has.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Before I take last comments, we have comments inside the Oval at the White House. Can we listen in, please? Can we have the sound up on that?
Years ago, when I visited Mumbai as Vice President, I emphasized how important it was for India and the United States to continue building a partnership, small steps at a time.
10 साल पहले करीब जब मैं इंडिया गया था मुंबई में तो मैंने कहा कि भारत और अमेरिका के लिए कितना जरूरी है कि एक कदम करके हम अपनी भागीदारी को आगे बढ़ाते जाएं.
Over that past 10 years, those small steps have transformed into large progress.
और समय के साथ-साथ वो छोटे-छोटे कदम हमने उठाए बहुत बड़ी प्रगति कर ली.
And today, the partnership between our countries is stronger than it's ever been.
और आज हम दोनों देशों के बीच में जो भागीदारी है पहले से कहीं अधिक मजबूत है.
We see it in our major defense partnership, now a pillar in the Pacific peace and security structure. We see it in our economic ties and efforts to promote inclusive economic growth for our people and, quite frankly, people all around the world.
अपने लोगों और समस्त विश्व के लोगों के बीच में भी देख रहे हैं कि एक समावेशी और आर्थिक विकास के प्रति हमारे आर्थिक संबंधों में आर्थिक गहराई और प्रगाढ़ता को आगे बढ़ाकर दिखा रहे हैं.
And we see it in our growing cooperation on a whole range of issues: space, emerging technologies, clean energy, global infrastructure.
और इससे हम देखते हैं बहुत से अन्य मुद्दों पर जैसे कि हमारे सहयोग के रूप में अंतरिक्ष से लेकर के उभरती हुई टेक्नोलॉजी प्रौद्योगिकी में साफ ऊर्जा तक और साथ ही हमें बुनियादी ढांचे में.
I want to thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for your decision to hosting the G20 this year, focusing more on the challenges that matter not just to you and I, but to all of us.
और माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी, मैं आपका बहुत आभार व्यक्त करना चाहता हूँ कि आपने G20 में इस वर्ष जो आपने नेतृत्व किया है और विश्व का ध्यान उन चुनौतियों की तरफ केंद्रित किया है जो कि हम सबके लिए बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है.
I look forward to discussing how we can strengthen our partnership and build a future together worthy of both our peoples, one grounded on democracy, human rights, freedom, and rule of law.
आज मैं आपके साथ चर्चा करने के लिए राह देख रहा हूँ कि किस तरह से हम आपकी और अपनी सहभागिता को और मजबूत कर सकते हैं और एक साथ मिलकर एक ऐसा भविष्य तैयार करें जो हमारे लोगों के लिए और अधिक बेहतर हो. एक ऐसा भविष्य जो लोकतंत्र, मानवाधिकारों, स्वतंत्रता और नियमों पर आधारित हो.
Welcome again, Mr. Prime Minister. We have a big agenda to continue to build our progress. Again, step by step. Continue to build.
तो माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी, एक बार फिर से आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है और मुझे हमारे सामने बहुत बड़ी कार्यसूची है इस समय पर जिसके लिए काम करना है, अपनी प्रगति के मार्ग को बढ़ाते जाना है, एक एक कदम उठाकर. धन्यवाद.
राष्ट्रपति जी, मैं आपका हृदय से बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूँ. और डॉक्टर जिल बाइडेन का भी हृदय से आभार व्यक्त करता हूँ जिस प्रकार से आपने गर्मजोशी से मेरा और हमारे डेलीगेशन का स्वागत किया। और विशेष रूप से मैं आपका आभार व्यक्त करता हूँ, आज आपने व्हाइट हाउस के द्वार भारतीय समुदाय के लिए खोल दिए और हजारों की तादाद में भारतीय समुदाय अमेरिका भारत की भावी रणनीति के साक्षी बनने के लिए आज हमारे बीच मौजूद थे।
Your Excellency President Biden, I once again express my heartfelt gratitude to you and to Dr. Jill Biden for the hospitality and the respect that you have shown to me and my delegation. And more importantly, because you opened the doors of the White House today for the Indian American people. And they were there in thousands to witness the future of our strategic partnership.
Excellent. आप हमेशा भारत के एक बहुत अच्छे शुभचिंतक रहे और जब भी आपको जहां भी अवसर मिला है आपने हमेशा भारत और अमेरिका के संबंधों के महत्व को बहुत बड़ा बल दिया है, बहुत बड़ी ताकत दी है। और मुझे याद है कि 8 साल पहले यूएस इंडिया बिजनेस काउंसिल को संबोधित करते आपने बहुत महत्वपूर्ण बात कही थी और आपने कहा था Our goal is to become India's best friend। ये आपके शब्द आज भी गूंज रहे हैं। भारत के प्रति आपकी यही व्यक्तिगत प्रतिबद्धता हमें अनेक बोल्ड और महत्वाकांक्षी कदम उठाने के लिए प्रेरित कर रहे हैं। आज भारत अमेरिका स्पेस की ऊंचाइयों से समुद्र की गहराइयों तक एंशियंट कल्चर से लेकर के आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस तक हर क्षेत्र में कंधे से कंधा मिलाकर चल रहे हैं।
Your Excellency, you've always been India's friend and well-wisher for a very long time. And whenever you have got an opportunity, you've always given force and strength to our bilateral relations. Excellency, 8 years ago, while addressing the US-India Business Council, you had said, our goal is to become India's best friend. And it is this personal commitment of yours towards India that is inspiring us to take many bold and ambitious initiatives. Today, India and the US are walking shoulder to shoulder in every field, from the depths of the oceans to the heights of the skies, from ancient culture to artificial intelligence.
डिप्लोमेटिक दृष्टि से जब किन्हीं दो देशों के बीच संबंधों की बात की जाती है तो अक्सर औपचारिक जॉइंट स्टेटमेंट, वर्किंग ग्रुप्स और एमओयू उसी के दायरे में आमतौर पर बातचीत होती है। इसका अपना महत्व है ही, लेकिन भारत और अमेरिका के रिश्तों का असली इंजन हमारे मजबूत पीपल टू पीपल संबंध है। और इस इंजन की एक जोर भरी दहाड़ हमने अभी बाहर व्हाइट हाउस के लोन पर भी सुनी है।
Excellency, whenever there is talk of relations between any two countries from a diplomatic point of view, people often talk about some form of joint statements, working groups, MOUs. All these definitely have their own importance, but the real engine of the Indian-US relationship is our strong people-to-people ties. And we just heard a spirited roar of that engine out on the White House grounds.
Excellency, जैसा आपने कहा, मैं उसे फिर से दोहराना चाहूंगा। आज की तेजी से बदल रही वैश्विक स्थिति में सभी की नजर विश्व के सबसे दो बड़े लोकतांत्रिक देशों पर है, भारत और अमेरिका पर। मेरा मानना है कि हमारी स्ट्रेटेजिक संवेदन मानव जाति के कल्याण के लिए, वैश्विक शांति और स्थिरता के लिए, लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों में विश्वास रखने वाली सभी ताकतों के लिए बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण है और पहले से कहीं ज्यादा महत्वपूर्ण है। मुझे विश्वास है कि हम मिलकर पूरे विश्व के सामर्थ्य को बढ़ाने में अवश्य सफल होंगे।
Your Excellency, as you said, and I would like to reiterate that, in today's rapidly changing global situation, all eyes are on the two largest democracies in the world, India and America.
I believe that our strategic partnership is important for the welfare of humankind, global peace and stability, and for all countries believing in democratic values. And this is important than ever before. I'm confident that working together will be successful in enhancing the spends of the whole world.
आज हमारी बातचीत में हम ऐसे ही कई मुद्दों पर बात करेंगे और अपने स्ट्रेटेजिक संबंधों को नए आयाम से जोड़ेंगे। मैं एक बार फिर आपको आपकी मित्रता के लिए हृदय से आभार व्यक्त करता हूँ।
We will talk about many such issues today. We will add new dimensions to our strategic partnership. I once again express my heartfelt gratitude to you for your friendship. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are expecting a joint press conference perhaps in an hour from now. Let's take last comments from our guests as we wind up this leg of our special broadcast. David Frum, it's over to you. Last thoughts. Obviously, for the cameras, there's going to be a lot of sort of formal protocol-driven comments. We saw both leaders were actually had written comments that they reference. What's the most prickly thing, and what's working, what's not working?
Well, you saw it there in President Biden's remarks. He said small steps add up to big progress. And that's a very good way of saying these steps are very small. And we have just made another small step. I think the big issue for the future to watch out for is the issue of emissions, which follows from India's energy needs. The United States, of course, is producing 14% less emission than it did at its peak, 2005. Even China, its emissions output has more or less flattened over the past decade in total terms. India, the Indian economy is growing fast. India has a growing population, but India's carbon emissions are also growing very fast. And that's going to be a challenging issue that is sooner or later going to run into some kind of tariff protection or something from the United States, EU, UK, and other developed countries.
Caryl Shukla, last thoughts? So you're on mute? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead. We can hear you.
So, is the Indo-US relationship entirely one way? I would think it is not. So let's look at this Predator deal. So the Americans were kind enough to lease 2 Predators to us after Galwan. We are going to strike a $3 billion deal with them. So there is reciprocity. And the second point in this is where India needs to change. Now, this is very significant. India has been used to the old Soviet system of, government-to-government transfers, PSU to PSU dealing. Here we now need to develop a new commercial outlook, which means what? Recognizing the fact that much of these technologies come from IPRs, which are owned by US business companies. So a business case has to be created around this. Here, the whole Indian defense ecosystem has to change. We must reciprocate by providing business opportunities for the technology that is being given to us. This is going to be very difficult. And the last point I'd like to make is that while there are many irritants in the relationship, it would seem to me that the apex leadership, the defense ministers, the NSAs do understand that nothing must come in the way of our strategic travel, strategic convergence. It is the debating societies below, like you and me, who don't seem to have got it.
All right, Christian, last thoughts, and we have one of our viewers saying that the GOP is more transactional and the Democrats are in human rights overdrive. That's a perspective from one of our Indian viewers in the live stream. I just thought I'd pick that up. It's actually interesting. Indians have sometimes argued that the Republicans are better for the relationship than the Dems, but within America, of course, Indian Americans tend to lean towards the Democrats. So that's an interesting point. We just lost Arun Singh. If we can get him back for a last comment, but Christian, let me give you the last word in the meantime. Christian?
Yes. Well, I would just say I think India and the United States do have a lot of shared interests, but I think it's important to stress that it's going to be a rocky relationship. It's not always going to be seamless. And yeah, maybe Republicans will be better at cultivating that relationship. As we've seen, though, they've also sometimes had a tendency to act out in foreign policy in ways that aren't necessarily going to be in India's interest. So I think Indians should remain very clear-eyed about that as well.
All right, we will leave it there. This is going to be a long night for those of us in different time zones tracking this meeting in the United States of America. There is a lots more ahead. There's a joint press appearance. There's a state dinner. There is the address to the U.S. Congress, and there'll be a lot more to actually talk about as those details emerge. Right now, I think we've seen only the ceremonial, in a way, part of the visit. The real meat of it is going to take place behind closed doors, and we want to thank all of you for your time. To Christian Caryl, to David Frum, to General Shukla, to Ambassador Arun Singh, and earlier to Joe Walsh, and to our audience. The broadcasting continues at the Mojo Story. We will have continuous live coverage, so do keep watching, and thank you for staying with us. See you soon.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.